Could you see? Could you see that those were babies?
Did I know those were human beings? Absolutely. I didn't care. I did not care.
All right, well, thank you all so much for being here. Everyone here has a different story. Patricia, Gigi, Emily, you having experienced having had abortions, and Dr. Levatino, Dr. Robinson, and Dr. Altman having performed abortions in the past. So I'd like to start with each person sharing their involvement with abortion briefly, maybe how many abortions performed or had, and the kinds and the time frame.
I got pregnant at 17 and had an abortion using RU-486 drugs. And then 7 months later, I got pregnant again and had another abortion using RU-486 drugs.
Yes, I had multiple abortions, 5. I did the surgical abortion with the suctioning during first trimester, and I had also the medical, the abortion pill.
I also had multiple abortions. I had 3 at the age of 19, and they were all surgical. And then I worked as an employee behind the doors of Planned Parenthood.
What kind of abortions were you involved with as an employee at Planned Parenthood?
So it was a D&C and the dismemberment also. Up to 20 weeks was involved.
Dr. Altman.
And I was on the other side. I probably did 500 abortions. And I also had an abortion, which is why I think I was so gung-ho, so pro-abortion when I started my residency, because I had my own abortion just prior to entering medical school, because I thought if I was pregnant, I wouldn't be able to become a doctor.
What kind of abortion did you have, Dr. Altman?
D&C with suction.
Can you just explain briefly what a D&E abortion is?
So a D&E, or as it's also called and is more descriptive, a dismemberment abortion. During that, usually you have to dilate the cervix ahead of time, usually the day before, with some laminaria, something that will expand the cervix. And then you go in with a suction tube to remove the fluid and bring the baby down lower into the uterine cavity so that you can then reach in with a forceps and with a clamp. And you just try to grab whatever you can grab and pull and twist, and the cervix is smaller than the baby, so the baby will be held back, and as you pull, you can pull off an arm or a leg, and once you've gotten all the arms and legs, then you try to go back. And I always tried to get the head next, because if you got the thorax and pelvis and just left the head, you have this little round ball that's trying to get away from you. So I would try to get the head, and as Dr. Levatino has described in the past, you know when you've gotten the head because the white brains leak out, and then you know you've gotten it. And then you just try to make sure you get the placenta and put all the body parts together. Now, I never did what they do at Planned Parenthood. I never sent that tissue to someone else to look at. I always stopped what I was doing, looked right then, because I needed to immediately know before I let that patient out of the stirrups that everything was complete, or she could come back with an infection or die. So then I would just check to make sure that all of the walls of the uterus seemed to be a little scratchy and it didn't have anything else. You know, I would put the suction back in and make sure she wasn't bleeding too much, and then I'd let her go to recovery.
I was involved in abortion in my training as a resident, also moonlighting or sideline hustle in Southern California. So I performed several hundred abortions, all in the first trimester, the D&C suction type of abortions. But during my training, I did witness saline abortions. I did see very mature, second, third trimester babies, which now we see in the NICU and lots of hospitals that that I have witnessed. So hundreds of abortions over several years.
I learned to do first and second trimester abortions, including suction D&Cs and saline abortions during my residency program. After I got into private practice over the next 4.5 years, I performed almost 1,200 first and second trimester abortions, including suction D&Cs and suction D&E abortions.
What does it feel like to talk to a former, for those who've experienced abortion, had abortions, and you yourself too, Dr. Allman, but what has it felt like to talk to former abortionists?
I never thought this day would come. I kind of compartmentalized or pushed the doctors, the staff to the back of my mind. And so I intentionally tried to forget everything that would happen behind those doors. And so this is really informative, and it is a bit of a shock that, you know, this wasn't just a quick experience or quick fix is what they like to call it, but this was an entire process of murder.
For me, it's very healing. I went through a process of healing, just like Gigi mentioned. Not only did I have to forgive my partner, I was pretty passive during one of my abortions, but I had to forgive all who failed, right? Society with their lies, the educators came in my school when I was a little girl, and also the abortionists that I felt lied to me, like they failed me, like you failed me, right? And so now that I'm publicly speaking, you know, as a former worker, I know the courage that it takes, you know, and I know that you're doing reparation for what was done, and I just want to thank you for your courage.
How do you feel the abortionists failed you?
Because I worked behind the doors of Planned Parenthood, and when I started to work there, they trained me to change my vocabulary, right? So, you know, they told me never use the word baby on abortion days, fetus, mother, father. You tell the women it's a sack of tissue. You never let them see the ultrasound. But I was the one that had to look for the body parts. I didn't know when I assisted the first abortion that I had to look for body parts. I seriously, with my whole heart, thought I was going to look for a sack of tissue, because that's what I was told before my 3 abortions. But to my shock and my surprise, there were babies, right? And so immediately I thought, they lied to me. They failed me, you know? They convinced me to kill my children when they told me they were sacks of tissues and clump of cells. They denied me the right to see the ultrasound. And so I had to heal from that.
I feel similar. There was a time in my life when I was very, very angry with abortionists, specifically the abortionist that gave me the pills for both of my abortions. I was angry because I felt that he understood the development of my baby my babies, and I did not. And I felt like I had been deceived in a sense because I wasn't given the full story, the full truth. And getting to sit here and hear your stories and see the redemption in you guys is just incredible. And I'm very, very thankful for that. And it's so healing for both sides to be able to find forgiveness and truth. And I'm just so thankful for the work that you guys are doing, and I love you guys.
I have a confession to make to you guys, just in proxy of the abortion doctors that I encountered and staff, but every time I would go, I would lie on the paperwork. I would lie about how many previous abortions I had because I was ashamed for the staff to know. Even though it was your job, this is where these things happen, this is where, you know, killing innocent babies happen, I somehow felt shame and didn't want you to know that I had previous abortions. And so I would lie on the paperwork to the point where even today I have to work my mind to even figure out the numbers and to figure out the dates and to, like, I suppress so much of that memory. And so it leads to my question, did you know if women lied? Could you tell if she had multiple abortions? How often did women come in with multiple abortions? was there red flags? Was there, just the numbers, the stats on what you saw in those?
A liar is a murderer. When we talk about abortion stats, the reality of it, I know in our facility or the facilities I've worked in, you'd make up numbers. I mean, who's really counting and who's going to check? You know about how many you've done. It's, oh, well, this month we did so many. It's depersonalized. And if you're killing babies, lying about how many you do, that's nothing, right? As I've gone through this process of sitting with former colleagues where we kill children and facing off with your faces, the faces of women who we took their babies away and the babies whose faces that we never see, just brings forth the reality of the depravity of men and women and what we're capable of. And when you put a face on it, it makes it real. And my thoughts are brought to a particular abortion I was involved in with my late wife, Dr. Johnson. He performed an abortion on her sister. Mm-hmm. We killed our niece or nephew. Mm-hmm. Each one of these abortions has a vast consequence. My niece or nephew would have been in their 40s right now. My sister-in-law had one child at the time. That child was killed in a boating accident. We killed which would have been her only surviving child. And that sister-in-law is childless now because of the abortion we performed on her. That should tell you a little bit about the capability and the depravity that we have within us, that we know it's spiritual, but I take responsibility for that, to be in that room and assist in the killing of a personal relative. Mm-hmm. And so it's a wake-up call that we are fighting an intense battle against a formidable enemy, but we still have to take personal responsibility at the same time.
When I returned to do abortions after my baby was born, I did abortions throughout my pregnancy and with no regrets. But when I went back after my baby was born, I ran into 3 patients who changed my mind, and I could no longer kill babies just because they weren't wanted. The first one was a girl who I had personally done 3 abortions on. She was using abortion as birth control, and I went to the clinic manager and I said, I don't want to do this abortion. She's had 3. I've done them. And she said, well, that's her right. You have no say, so you need to do that abortion. I said, well, that's easy for you to say. You're not doing the killing. I don't think I ever judged any of my patients prior to that. But at that point, I thought, no, this is wrong. And thankfully, for that girl, that was the beginning of the end for me. So I was thankful that, she couldn't have lied because she was in our records and I knew I had done them. But somehow for me, knowing that I had done 3 abortions on one woman, one girl, young girl, was unsettling.
I have a question that I've always wondered. When I had to look for the body parts, the 5 pieces of the baby, the first time I knew that was a human being. Like, the scales fell off my eyes, and I was literally in shock. And the abortionist came in to make sure that everything was in the Petri dish, right? This big dish that we had. And he was whistling, and I remember him saying to everybody, what are we all gonna have for lunch? When before this abortion, he told me to tell the young woman it was not a baby, it was a sack of tissue. And I remember screaming inside of myself, how can he not see what I'm seeing? And my question is, could you see? Could you see that those were babies?
I can answer that. for myself. I cannot speak for any other abortionist in the world. Did I know those were human beings? Absolutely. I didn't care. I did not care.
For me, and I don't know the mechanism, I don't know the mental mechanism taking place, but for me, I guess I knew they were human, but it was very schizophrenic. But my interest was extremely scientific. I didn't see the difference between them and a chick embryo, or a frog that we dissected. I thought they were beautiful. Again, I don't know how this is possible, but I had the same reaction as Abby Johnson, that when I looked, I thought, oh, look at the little toes and look at the little fingers. They're so amazing. But somehow I didn't see them as little people, that were worth caring about. If the mom wanted her baby and she was miscarrying, I was distraught with her. But if she didn't want her baby, then I was willing to dispose of that child, of that baby. And it wasn't till I read an article comparing abortion to the Holocaust that I suddenly realized that I could do these terrible things because I didn't consider them human beings. I didn't see them as human. And I guess more like animals. Although I can't imagine myself being willing to pull off the arms and legs of a little kitten, I probably would have had more sympathy for them. But somehow there's this darkness that clouds your mind, and you can do things that you would never think possible. I thought I was a good person. I have to apologize. I really thought I was helping women and had no idea the trauma, and the scarring that I left in my wake. All the girls that I did abortions on were young girls, college students, probably some high school students, all for normal pregnancies. None of them were for maternal indications or fetal indications. They were all just normal babies. And I do worry about what happened to those women later, because I know for me, it was very traumatic once I realized what I had done, once I'd had a baby, how traumatic it was for me. And again, I also went through a post-abortal syndrome. Thankfully, I had people around who could give me the counseling and the healing that I needed to heal. And I also have to admit, unlike you felt more guilty because of your involvement in other people's abortions. I felt more guilty that I could actually kill my own child as opposed to killing other people's children. Not that either is less, but I had more trouble forgiving myself for killing my own child.
We've talked about that process of how you become progressively insensitive, desensitized to you as a human being, and desensitized to the human being that's inside of you that I'm about to kill, as long as you give me the money. But I think I'm also recognizing there's superimposed on that a switch that puts those scales on, the same way I could take glasses off and glasses on. A Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. You see, I can be down the hall and deliver a live baby, be involved with labor and delivery, and it's good old Dr. Robinson, happy and encouraging another push. Yeah, because the baby's almost here, and here's the baby, cut the umbilical cord, and everybody's happy. And walk a few feet down the hall, Dr. Jekyll switches to Mr. Hyde, and I kill the baby. Same person, same doctor, but I don't believe they're really the same person spiritually. The enemy has the capability of manifesting himself in you appropriately. And again, I take responsibility for that, but you're actually able to flip a switch almost instantaneously from healer to killer.
Well, I think both doctors and moms do that. So easy to talk about somebody else's life, but if I talk to a group, I remind them of something. Today you're an adult. Once you were a child, you didn't look anything like you look today. Once you were this big, but it was always you. And try to personalize it, because you're right. We can turn it on and turn it off. We learned that in medical school, day one. If I'm doing surgery, hysterectomy, nothing to do with abortion. For that hour, that's a collection of arteries, nerves, veins. Don't cut the ureter, get the uterus out, make sure she doesn't bleed too much, don't let her get infected. And I know intellectually that she's a mom and a wife and she has family and people that love her. But for that time, that's the job. And abortion is the same.
You know, I never had any regrets about what I was doing or any qualms until I was doing my neonatal rotation. And I realized that I was killing babies the same age as ones I was trying to save. But the training is so effective and you learn to compartmentalize so well that I just was able to shove those thoughts to the back of my mind. And I didn't think about it again.
I have a question because I used to, how do I say this word? I used to think it was okay that if I aborted early enough that the baby wasn't harmed, that there wouldn't be too much damage to myself. I thought the blob of cells, the tissue. And I always wanted to know when that vacuum was finally turned off. Where did the baby go?
Medical waste. Medical waste. Or to pathology, to be sectioned.
I know in some facilities they actually refer to the area where the remains of these killed babies are as the nursery.
We had a big freezer in our facility, so a biohazard would come in monthly, so it wouldn't smell like death and rotten. We would tie the bags at the end of the day, the biohazard bag with all these dismembered babies inside, and open up the big freezer, and you would see blocks of ice of all the aborted children from the month.
What was that moment, perhaps, when you came to see this is a life, my child, other people's children, and was there a moment after that where you felt despair? And can you describe what that was like? Did you ever feel despair after coming to see, or maybe you're in the process of beginning to see, these are children, these are human beings?
For me, it was when I was pregnant with my son. I was about 10 weeks pregnant with him and was looking at pregnancy apps and reading about his development, and it just dawned on me that the baby that I had aborted years previously was that exact same gestational age, and all of these facts that I didn't know about their development just broke my heart. And I was in despair for years. I struggled with alcoholism. I struggled with thoughts of suicide. I struggled in just about every way that a person can feel shame and grief and regret. And I still struggle. It's still hard, but I know that sharing is healing and that I'm going to continue healing and just want to do what's right now and honor my children by trying to warn other women.
The first abortion I assisted, it was a 12-week baby, and my first abortion was at 16 weeks. And when I saw the baby completely formed, that's when my heart broke. You know, and I realized, you know, that I had killed my own children. But I felt, after working there, I felt guilt, shame, and I remember thinking to myself, you can mess up your credit history, and you can repair that. That can be repaired, and that can be fixed and wiped out. But how can you undo this? How can you undo murder? How can you undo so many babies' lives that were taken? and I felt completely hopeless.
I think I experienced more despair having an abortion in a shower. Doing the surgical abortions where I was under some kind of sedation or what, not quite sure what it's called. And so in those moments, I was less conscious, not fully unconscious, but less conscious. But that one in the shower where I had to stand there and bleed out to death, it felt like. And my boyfriend at the time is in the bedroom crying because he begged me not to do it. And he's crying because it's too late at that point. And I remember forcing myself not to look down because I didn't want to see. And when it was all over, I just forced myself not to look at the apps, not to research, not to Google the truth. And it wasn't until I went through a post-abortion program that part of the homework assignment was to read each week. And it was in that moment that I read that there was not a week acceptable, that there was not a day acceptable to take that life, to stop a life. And so that's when it really hit me that this is unacceptable.
Yeah, I feel in some ways despair, as you mentioned, and overwhelmed. I'm here, witnessing and hearing what you ladies are sharing, but you guys are the tip of the iceberg. Because when we do the math, whether it be of abortion survivors or post-abortive women, we are talking about millions of women who haven't even started the process or even know about the process you're going to. How are we going to get to these women to give them the help that you're exposed to, that they need to, so they can start their journey, so they can start humanizing the child that they've lost? And because right now, so many of these women are just blended into our environment at McDonald's or a restaurant or right in our own workplace, right in our church congregations, and we're pretending they're not there. We have a supernatural task ahead of us to try to help some of these women.
I used to make $800 in 15 minutes doing a D&E abortion. And I was dedicated. I tell people, some people say they're pro-life or pro-choice. But when you're a gynecologist and you say you're pro-choice, this isn't some vague political position. You have to decide whether you're going to do those abortions. And I did. I was dedicated to it. And you can rationalize it 1,000 ways. I'm the hero here. I'm being a great doctor, taking care of her problem and all of this. My wife and I had struggled with infertility. We were able to adopt a little girl we named Heather. Subsequently, my wife did get pregnant very quickly after we adopted our daughter. But exactly 2 months from my daughter's 6th birthday, she was killed in an auto accident. And I don't remember how long it was after her death, but I showed up at the hospital to do a D&E abortion. Wasn't thinking of it as anything special. This was routine. Put that Sofer clamp in, ripped out an arm or a leg, and just stared at it in the clamp and got sick. But once you start an abortion, you can't stop. You have to get 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces. Because if you don't, your patient will come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I finished that abortion. I said earlier that I didn't care, and I didn't care. It wasn't that I suddenly saw unborn babies as human beings. I always knew they were human beings. But this was something different. For the first time in my career, after all those abortions, I looked I mean, after everything what we were going through, losing a child, I really looked at that pile of body parts. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see what a great doctor I was helping her with her problem, and I didn't even see the $800 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. That was the change. That was the change right there. Now, I didn't stop doing abortions right away. I knew why I felt bad, and I'll get over this. So I soldiered on for months after that. But once you see, for me, it wasn't, well, this is a human being. It wasn't that at all. It was, this is someone's son or daughter. That was the change that eventually got me out of the abortion business.
I had two major things that happened. Somehow after having a baby, I made that baby fetus connection, and after these 3 different patients, I realized I could no longer kill babies just because they weren't wanted. But it wasn't until several years later, I'd become a Christian, still believed in abortion, but at one point a Christian friend came to me and said, "Kathy, I know you feel strongly about abortion, but would you read this article?" And the article compared abortion to the Holocaust. And my father was present when the first concentration camp was liberated. And so I grew up with all those pictures and stories. And I could never understand how the German doctors could do what they did until I read that article. And suddenly I realized that just as I didn't consider my victims as human beings, they didn't consider their victims as human beings. And that was when the scales fell, and suddenly I saw myself as a mass murderer. And that was truly devastating, because here I thought I was doing so much good, and yet I was doing so much evil. It took a lot of counseling and healing. I read Susan Sanford's Rue's book on post-abortal syndrome, because at the same time, I realized not only had I murdered other people's children, I had murdered my own child. And, thankfully I had counseling available. Now that process wasn't very long for me, because I guess God put me on the fast track and said, okay, well, you're going to get healed because this is what you need to do. And I just said, okay, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. And there I was in the pro-life movement.
I keep hearing about unwanted children. Mm-hmm. There are maybe about 1 million abortions a year. We haven't got a clue how many abortions there are out there. Mm-hmm. I did 1,200 abortions. The only ones I reported to the state with death certificates are the ones I did in hospitals. That means 1,000 abortions I did by myself, never got it reported to anybody. But beyond that, we're talking about 1 million a year. Well, in any given year, there's about 2 million people out there with infertility who are desperate to find children to adopt. Virtually every child is a wanted child. Maybe not necessarily by mom and dad, but that child is a wanted child.
There are even waiting lists for Down syndrome children. And when I would speak, invariably, or testify invariably, somebody would catch me in the ladies' room and tell me their story. And this one lady came up to me, and there was a woman who had a baby with a fatal diagnosis, and she had 3 children, and she just didn't feel she could care for that baby. And so when the baby was, she carried the baby to term, and when the baby was born, when the baby was released from the hospital, this woman took that child and cared for that child for the 3 months that they lived. And she said she was so blessed by that, and the mother was blessed by the fact that she wasn't forced to kill her child in the womb just because, well, the baby was going to die anyway, and it might affect her health, and blah, 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 all those lies. And I thought how wonderful it is, but there are people in this world who are even willing to take those who have deficits, who aren't perfect. So there's really no reason that we have to have abortion.
And we're not so perfect ourselves, are we? My way out, and Jesus set me free. He found me. I went to this Christian music concert. Leon Patella was performing. This was 1986. It was 3 weeks before our baby daughter was to be born via repeat C-section. And I went to that concert. Halfway through that concert, Leon had a little intermission, and he said, those of you out there that want things to be 100% right with God, stand up. I mean, you sound like a good deal to me. 100% right with God? Why not? And I stood up there, and it was the Holy Spirit that yanked me up, because I'm the type of guy, I got to check things out first to see if it's appropriate for me to stand up. And I'm standing up, but now it's too embarrassing to sit down because that would draw more attention. But there are a few other people standing. And he prayed what I know now that was like a sinner's prayer, but I was raised in a church that didn't really preach the gospel or teach anything about what salvation was. So I didn't know anything happened. I just sat back down after the prayer was over and enjoyed the remainder of that concert. I just happened to take my mother to the concert because my wife was in bed, my late wife, because at 37 weeks, you're not really interested in going out to a concert. But even though I knew nothing about Jesus or his purpose, when I got home, I felt different. I knew something was changed in me. And so, God always has a way of taking you through the progression. Some plant, some water, some prune. And there was a young man who was my roommate in medical school who happened to be coming to be a part of that delivery as the godfather, and he just happened to be the son of a Pentecostal preacher. And when I shared with him about how I went to this concert, he said, and how I feel different, he starts to cry. And he shared with me how he and his wife had been praying that my late wife and I come to Christ. So it wasn't through me learning that abortion was wrong in God's eyes. He saved me, but then everything else, God's light was shined on. And of course, what God tends to do, well, if you were in medicine or you were in abortion, God fixed all of my sin. I was going to hell long before I even knew what an abortion was. But what he said, well, since you had this experience in abortion, I'm going to take you now, and I'm going to train you and your late wife up. We're going to make you guys pro-life warriors. So it started with that walk with Christ and being transformed by the renewing of your mind, because in your mind that you were deceived to have these scales before your eyes. A woman doesn't ever really want to kill her child. A doctor doesn't ever want to kill a baby. But we are deceived to think that we could do it. And it's only through the clarity of God's point of view that we can be set free and see through his truth and light.
Patricia, Gigi, or Emily, do any of you have anything that you want to say, any last words or any questions for Dr. Levatino, Dr. Robinson, or Dr. Altman?
I just want to ask, usually when there's a medical procedure, right, I worked in the medical field, you always give the patient most of the time a follow-up appointment. And, doctor, you mentioned that you didn't know what happened to the women after their abortions. How come after an abortion there is no, or I'm not sure if this was in your case, but a follow-up appointment to see how she's really doing?
So in the clinic I was working in, they did a post-op appointment, but it might not be on the person that you did the abortion on, because we were residents, we were kind of rotated through. Also, it was very automated in a way. We would walk in the room, patient was already in stirrups. We had, in the morning, we would talk to some of the patients, but then we'd walk in the room, they were already in stirrups, we'd do the procedure. The nurses we would move to the next room, we'd, wash our hands, new patient already in stirrups. It was just bam, 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 throughout the day. So there was a disconnect. And I hope they would have told me if I had a complication, but I was never told that I had any, complications. And they may have been, but they just didn't relay that back.
We always saw our patients. Always. Because it wasn't, okay, you wanted an abortion, you got the abortion, let's do what we can so you don't need another abortion in the future. That doesn't mean we're always successful, but we saw all of our patients. That's what I see. That's the difference between running it in an office where you do everything and a mill where you're only doing one thing.
In the mill, going to Planned Parenthood or one of these abortion facilities where that's primarily what they do, again, dealing with shame, even from the abortion staff themselves, I purposely wouldn't go back. So I never got a follow-up. I thank God that I haven't had any complications. Even when I got pregnant with my son, my 3-year-old they put me on the high-risk pregnancy side because they assumed that after all of the abortions, after all of the procedures I had gone through, I had to have some kind of complication or scarring, so I had to get my cervix checked. I had to get my womb, just everything closely looked at. And I had nothing, thank God. But I never went back for a follow-up because I was just so ashamed. And I would deceive myself and say, I'm not going to do this again, but I didn't change my lifestyle. So speaking for a lot of the women, they probably are doing the same thing. They're not coming back unless there's, really bad complications, or they just die.
But those are physical complications because there's mental and there's emotional ones,
yes.
right? That are not, that they go through, even suicidal tendencies that are, it's, that's not being treated, right?
At all.
We didn't do follow-ups. I worked in several mills. Say for instance, in the town where I'm from, College Station, the facility where Abby Johnson walked out of, we would never see women back. The abortionists who would come to that facility would be brought in a car covered up with a blanket so we couldn't see them, and they usher them in and out. But that same doctor the next day might be in Waco the next day or be in Austin the next day. These were itinerant doctors who get away with patient abandonment. I don't know how, that's the abortion distortion. But we have to remember that abortion is a traumatic experience to women. Most of these women don't even want to come back to the facility where they lost their baby. There's women who I know of that, and I've heard about, who don't even want to drive down the street where they had their abortion because it gives them a flashback. So coming back 2 weeks later to be in the same building where they lost their baby, to where they went through that trauma, is like saying, well, let's go back to this car wreck, where I lost my child in a traffic accident. Who'd ever want to do that? So follow-up is a reenactment of a murder, in a way.
Dr. Levatino, Dr. Robinson, or Dr. Altman, is there anything that you want to say or any questions that you have for Emily, Gigi, or for Patricia?
Just I'm thankful for your forgiveness and your bravery, because women need to hear that there are not only physical but emotional consequences for abortion, and that is belied by the abortion industry. They know that women have emotional difficulties after abortion. There are suicides, there are drug addictions, anxiety, mental problems, but all of that is swept under the rug. And young women are told, this is the solution to your problem, and it'll be fine. You do this, you'll be fine. And that's such a huge lie.
I just say thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you guys, because, people always try to discourage us or say that we're over exaggerating or lying, and you bring the expert side, you bring like a backbone to our stories and to our experiences that I don't have the degree or the terminology to explain to people what I went through. And so what you bring to the pro-life movement is so powerful, so powerful. So I just want to thank you guys for your willingness to be pro-life warriors, like you said, because we need it. We need that.
Well, I thank you guys for forgiveness, but we're in it to win it. But I think it's not about us. It's about these millions of women that are out there. I think we're moving along, but there's all of these women and men. We don't talk about the men.
We never talk about the men.
That have to be made whole, and thank God we're on that journey to do that.
If there's one thing you could say to a woman who is listening who's had an abortion, what would that one thing be?
That there's hope, and there's purpose, and there's healing, that your pain has purpose, that you can use it as a strong instrument against evil to save lives, and that you have a voice. You have a voice. And for maybe a woman contemplating abortion, I would say congratulations, because you're a mama already. We don't congratulate pregnant women enough, I feel. No matter what your circumstance is or how you conceived that life, congratulations.
I would say that I know you probably think we all look down on you, we shame you, we hate you. From someone who is now pro-life, who was once pro-choice, please know that you're not a lost hope. We may not have approached, your excuses with support, but that is because we know the pain of abortion, and we know the reality of killing innocent babies. However, we also know that your eyes are not opened yet, but if you would open your heart to the other side of that pain and allow your heart to heal, you won't regret it. And so my hope for every post-abortive woman is to get healed now. Because if pregnancy happens again, if you're healed now, you most likely will not abort again. You most likely will not put yourself through that kind of pain again. So,
I agree. I would just say that the very first step to healing is admitting the truth to yourself, even though it can be extremely painful, but it's worth it. It is so worth it to be truthful with yourself and to others and to just work towards healing.
And for each of you, if there's just one thing you could say today, you had some, carrier pigeon that would drop a miracle message on every woman that you performed an abortion on, and they got some one line or short message from you, what would that message be?
Please seek healing. Receive God's forgiveness and forgive yourself.
At the risk of the director's ire, I'm going to look into the camera and say that if you're pregnant and if you're thinking about an abortion, I appreciate the tremendous pressure that you're feeling right now. You may be worried about finances. You may be worried about family. You may be worried about work. You may be worried about your future. But no matter what your situation is, no matter where you're coming from, you and only you can give your son or daughter the chance to live just like you do.
And I would say abortion is never the answer. It may seem like the easy way out, but abortion is never the answer, and it will always destroy you.
Well, I was thinking of that carrier pigeon dropping that capsule, and maybe I could fit in that capsule and land within arm's distance of that woman and grab them and tell them it's going to be okay. I got you. And that the hope you talk about, yes, there's going to be hope. We're not going to let you go. Hold that woman like they're my daughter and say, we're going to walk through this, whether you're post-abortive, whether we're going to get your baby delivered, and it's going to be okay. We got you.
And I would say there's help out there for you. You know, there are so many pregnancy centers around, and there is, you know, unlike what you've been told, there is help. There's financial help. There's emotional support. There's training. There's diapers. There's all kinds of things available, so that you should not feel forced into having an abortion. You need to ask. You need to find out, what is there for me? Because there are people willing to come alongside you and help.